Kate Mulligan, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. I forgot who I was there for a second. I was distracted. Welcome everybody. You never know what you're going to get here. I was looking around on my Roku television the other evening for something to look at, and I stumbled on a documentary about Karen Carpenter, and I had heard about it, but I didn't want to pay to watch it. And it was being offered for free. So I thought, oh, okay, I'll watch it. Maybe it cost $1. I don't remember. It was, $1. And so I still love Karen Carpenter. I think she and Linda Ronstadt had two of the most remarkable voices in human history, in my experience. And when I was of an age, I was in my late teens, early 20s, when she was in her prime, musical prime. It was kind of sneered at to like Karen Carpenter. I mean, yeah, they were good, and yeah, they were top of the Billboard, but it was a little bit not rough around the edges enough, a little too pop, a little too conventional. And I really like songs that I can sing along with. I don't like songs where I don't know what people are saying, and I really don't like noise, cacophony. Now, I'm married to somebody who was in a rock band. Needless to say, we don't agree on a lot of this stuff. He'll come downstairs and he'll say, "Did you hear Joe Blow died?" And I'll say, "No, God, who is that?" Thinking I've forgotten a friend or a neighbor. And it'll be some drummer from some obscure 1960s rock band that I have no idea what he's talking about. So, however, we agree on other things. We agree on other kinds of music, so it's okay. Now, Karen Carpenter had a beautiful, beautiful voice and a very troubled life. And we're going to talk about her because the beginning of February is the anniversary of her death. It all kinds of, kind of synchronistically works out. So I really wanted to talk about her and honor her music, which was beautiful, and her talent, which was not fully appreciated, and talk about what her life and death actually did for the larger world. And then I want to be mad at people in her life. Before I start, I should warn you that we're going to talk about eating disorders. There's no way to not talk about eating disorders and not talk about Karen Carpenter's life and death. And I will try to be as circumspect as I can. But, okay, let's talk about it. Karen Carpenter was born March 2nd, 1950, in New Haven, Connecticut. Her father, Harold, and her parents have the funniest middle American, just conventional. Her dad's name was Harold, and her mother's name was Agnes. I actually love the name Agnes. Agnes comes from the Latin. It means lamb. And I just really like that name. If I ever get another dog, I think I'm going to name it Agnes. Just putting you all on notice. Okay. Her father, Harold, was born in China because his parents were missionaries. And when he was old enough, they sent him away to English boarding schools. So that kind of sets up his background. You kind of get a sense of what he might have held as important in parent-child relationships. And the only thing I could find out about her mother was her name, Agnes. I could find no information. She had one older brother, Richard, and he was a prodigy. He was a piano prodigy. He was musically gifted, and his mother wanted everybody to know. This was problematic, and I'm not going to mince words about it. There was not a healthy dynamic going on there. He was her gift from God, and everything and everybody was overshadowed by that. Karen, she preferred dance and sports. She was into both of those. She did tap, she did ballet, she played softball. She proved later in life she was a really good softball player. In June of 1963, the whole family moved to Downey. had to do with her dad's work. And she began high school at the age of 14 at Downey High School. She started a year early than other kids her age. You know, smartness ran in the family. And she joined the marching band mostly to get out of gym, which I think is interesting because she was really into athletics. But she was into game type athletics, not rope climbing nonsense. So she wanted to get out of it. And if you joined the marching band, you got a pass. And so she took the instrument that the band leader kind of handed to her, which was the glockenspiel. Probably not the first thing you think of. And she hated it. And what she wanted to play was the drums. And, you know, she was a girl, and that was not conventional. But she pushed, and she asked for the drums. And she had a friend named Frankie Chavez. And he convinced her family. She's really good at the drums. The band leader let her, you know, play drums in the marching band. And her friend went to her family and said, hey, she is really good at this. And they convinced them to buy her a $300 drum set. Today it would be worth $3,000. So he was a persuasive salesman, I think. Most of this information I got online, and some of it I remembered from watching the documentary. I didn't take notes while I watched the documentary because I wanted to enjoy it. It was after I watched it, I thought, oh my God, I have to do a video on this. So there are a few things that pop out later that I'll talk about. Anyway, she was mentored by Chavez, but largely self-taught. It's not like she got elaborate training the way her brother did on piano. But she was talented and she rehearsed every day. She was really dedicated to it. Eventually, she began to study with a guy called Bill Douglas. Now, he was big in the Benny Goodman Band and with Art Tatum. Art Tatum, the name is familiar. That doesn't really mean a lot to me. I know he was, you know, in music. But Benny Goodman, I know who he was. And so this guy was a professional drummer, and he took her under his wing. She finally was able to afford a professional drum kit. So a $3,000 drum kit wasn't good enough. Yikes. And she graduated from high school. She was awarded the John Philip Sousa Band Award. Professor Harold Hill. She became a music major at Long Beach State College, State University in California. She sang in the choir of the college with her brother. And she began taking singing lessons because they recognized almost immediately, wow, what a voice. She had a full 3-octave range. Apparently that's really good. I'm still working on a full 3-note range, so I can't be sure, but it's very good. And the two of them performed together in a local production of Guys and Dolls. She started an all-girl trio. Now, this is in the early 60s, so imagine. And then, excuse me, she and her brother Richard and a friend called Wes Jacobs formed the Dick Carpenter Trio. I want to point out here a little fact that jumped out at me. No matter what they did, he always took first billing. No matter, he did write a lot of their songs and he did orchestrate their albums. However, they played jazz in nightclubs, and Karen didn't really sing. She played the drums. The group eventually got a contract with RCA, and they made a couple of single, instrumentals, but they were never released. Then they got signed on with the Wrecking Crew, and this may or may not mean something to you. I had heard the term and didn't have any idea what it was. And then my husband was like lecturing me about it. And this is a while back, and I watched a documentary about it. This was a group of studio musicians. It was a collective of the best studio musicians in the business in the 60s. And very interesting that a lot of what we heard on our favorite albums in the 60s was not the group that was purported to be. Some of it was, but the backup, all the instrumentals, all the music and the creativity of the music in the background was all done by this group of studio musicians. They didn't go on tour with them or anything, but they were responsible for what final product came out on the albums. And she started out as a drummer, but then they heard her voice and they thought, wait a minute. What's really, really funny is they weren't interested in Richard at all. And this was a big bone of contention. They focused on her as the real talent because not only was she gifted on the drums, I mean, really, you see her playing the drums, you just go, oh my God, and her voice. So they all joined up with a harmony group, and they learned about multi-track dubbing. Now, I'll say this. I will never forget the first time I ever heard the Carpenters. I was driving in my little Datsun, and the radio was on always. The radio was on, and this beautiful, beautiful, ethereal, kind of harmonious song came on. We've Only Just Begun, I think it was. And I thought, oh, wow, what a great group, you know. And I was imagining, I don't know, 6 or 7 people. And when the song was over, the master of ceremonies said, this is 2 people. This is a brother and a sister. And he explained the idea of multi-track dubbing. I'd never heard of that. And I was blown away that was a potential thing you could do. And I was so impressed by the sound of it. And they were famous for their harmonies. They had trouble getting a following. They were kind of niche. And they were so different from the hard rock and the rock that was popular in clubs. If you remember, the Go-Go Girls and the psychedelic things in the background and all that kind of thing. They were not quite in that niche. In 1968, they won a television talent show. And in 1969, they got a contract from A&M Recording. The A is Herb Alpert. The other guy, I kind of remember his name, and it sounds familiar. Now I can't remember, sorry. But Herb Alpert, whipped cream. Yeah. Anyway, she played the drums and she sang, but she was only 5'4", and she was back there behind the drums and nobody could see her. Richard wrote 10 out of the 13 songs on the first album they made for A&M called Offering. She also played the bass on a couple of the songs. It was okay. It did okay. The next album they made had 2 singles that went number 1 and number 2 on the Billboard Top 100. The song Close to You and then We've Only Just Begun. Interesting from the documentary, it talked about how they found the song We've Only Just Begun. Paul Williams, who wrote a whole lot of ditties, for advertisements on the television commercials. He had written just We've Only Just Begun to Live, it's kind of a shorter version of it. And the Carpenters heard it and they went, oh, we have to find out. And they knew Paul Williams. They were friends with him. So they asked him, hey, could we have that? And the rest is history. So as I said, she was only 5'4", and she kind of was hidden. You can see her in the documentary. You can see the top of her head and the drums. And they finally convinced her, look, you have to be up front. I think they realized she had the charisma. Her brother Richard did not. She had the charisma and she had the voice. And they convinced her to come up front. And this is one of the facts in the documentary that I either missed, which is entirely possible, or that they didn't stress, And I found out when I was researching, and I was just shocked. I went down a rabbit hole looking into this. So she had a friend called Cubby O'Brien. And that's not his first name, Cubby. He had a different kind of a name, and it just didn't ring a bell with me. But he was a former Mouseketeer. Remember cute little Cubby and the Mouseketeers? Well, he was their drummer for years and years. When she was up front singing, he was the drummer, and he was the drummer for however long, 2 decades. He was interviewed a lot in the documentary, and he was very sad. He really loved her. I don't think love, but they were very, very close. And he really respected her talent. Her death was a huge loss to him. You could just tell. Anyway, she became the focal point of the albums and performances moving forward. She was one everybody wanted to see. And she had what's called a contralto. It's this beautiful, rich, lower register female voice. And, it's lower. And she used to say, the money's in the basement. I thought that was cute. She called herself a drummer who sang. That tells you a lot. Something that was not very well known. Now, this is apparently factual. So I'm taking this from the research that I've done. I'm not making accusations, but apparently her brother Richard struggled with an addiction to Quaaludes in the 70s, and they had to cancel tour dates because of it. They stopped touring after September of 78. They were at the MGM Vegas. They had to cancel things. So what happened? In 1980, Karen teamed up with Ella Fitzgerald on a Carpenters TV special called Music, Music, Music. And in 81, they made their last album together called Made in America. They went on a few stage tours. She started touring without him. She started doing things without him on her own, including the BBC. In 1982, the last song that she did was called Now. She had this parallel solo career going on that her family and Richard did not like and really didn't support. In 1968, she did her first solo release called on a thing called Magic Lamp label. And the company itself was tiny and didn't get off the ground and sort of folded. So this sort of, went over like a lead balloon. In 1979, after they canceled their tour, Richard went into treatment and she moved. She sort of started anew. She left LA. She went to New York City. She started recording with producer Phil Ramone. She kind of went disco a little bit. And there was an argument. Okay, I'm trying to read my handwriting. There was an argument at the time between Herb Alpert with A&M Records and Quincy Jones, who was a producer at the time for him, about should she be doing disco? Should she be changing her style? What's going on with Karen Carpenter? And to cover themselves, A&M made her pay $400,000 to record her disco-ish album. In 1989, so this is later after she had died, parts of it were released, and some little bits of it were included in Love Lines, which was the last Carpenters unreleased songs. And in 1996, finally, there was a full solo album released of Karen Carpenter by herself. So everywhere you read, she had a complicated relationship with her parents. They had moved originally to Los Angeles for Richard's musical career, and they were unaware of Karen's talent. I felt very sad for her because intuitively I feel like she was always overshadowed by her brother. He was the first child, the only son, and the golden boy. And she was this not quite the feminine ideal that her mother had hoped for. Now, I am putting words in her mouth, but it's just a gut feeling I get. She was a little bit of, they refer to her as a tomboy. I thought that was interesting. She was less girly than her very gender normed mother would have preferred. And there was always tension. And I'm sure it didn't do her self-esteem any good to always be compared to and found lacking their brother. She lived with her parents until 1974. And so she was 24 years old. She was still living with her parents. But in 1976, she moved out. But in 76, she bought 2 Century City apartments and combined them into one big apartment. Century City's, well, you know, kind of a nice place if you like that kind of urban situation. It's expensive. One thing about her that I just thought was really significant, it said something to me. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but it struck me as important. She collected Disney memorabilia. Now, there's nothing really wrong with that, except that when you looked at her bedroom, it looked like the bedroom of a child. She's a fully grown adult in her own apartment, and it was frilly and girly, and there were stuffed animals everywhere. Stuffed animals on the bed, stuffed animals on the shelves. Struck me as a little bit infantilizing. I wrote her bedroom looked like a kid's room. It was interesting. She was really good at softball. I had mentioned that. She became the pitcher on a celebrity all-star softball team in the 70s, and they played all over the place, and they won, they did very well, and she was the star pitcher. She was really good. They had some documentary footage of her, and I don't know very much about softball, but the ball went far. She was really good. She was a big Yankees fan, big baseball fan. Interesting. I thought this relationship was so interesting. She was very close with Olivia Newton-John. Which kind of makes sense. They're both in the same business, right? She also was really good friends with Petula Clark and Dionne Warwick. She and Olivia spent a lot of time together, and Olivia was interviewed for the documentary extensively, and it's really interesting to hear her observations of what was going on with Karen. Karen Carpenter was not a feminist. You might think she was a feminist, given to playing softball and being independent, solo career. But no, she had very, very retro views on marriage and gender roles in marriage. Early in her beginning maturity, let's say late teens, early 20s, she had zero interest in marriage and zero interest in dating. She simply didn't date. One of the guys that was in the band with her, she was like the only girl in the Carpenters' larger band with the backup musicians and everything. There's a lot of pictures of them, and she's the only girl ever. And he said, and this might have been Cubby who said this, he said, nothing ever happened with her and any of the men in the band. Nothing. He said, I don't know if that was because we all respected her too much. We didn't want to wreck a good thing by getting it messy. Those are not his exact words, but that's what he was implying. I had other thoughts. I don't know. I'll leave that. She thought that her excuse, anyway, her explanation was that touring was hard on relationships, therefore she didn't want a relationship. She said a marriage would never survive life on the road. She found it very hard to meet people and very hard to trust people because people knew who she was and she didn't know, well, do they like me for who I am as a person or for my bank account and my fame? She told Olivia that she longed for marriage and a family. She wanted nothing more than to get married and have children. She dated an interesting conglomeration of guys. This is just a short list, and I have to tell you, I was like, what? So she dated Tony Danza, Mark Harmon, you know, the Star Wars guy, Steve Martin, Alan Osmond, Donny Osmond's older brother, and Bill Hudson. Bill Hudson is the, if I'm not mistaken, the ex-husband of Goldie Hawn and the father of Kate Hudson and Oliver Hudson. Anyway, she suddenly got married. People were just gobsmacked. 1 month she wasn't, and then the next month she was fully married to a guy called Tom Burris. He was a real estate developer. It was called a whirlwind relationship. That's always a red flag, girls. Always a red flag. He was divorced and had an 18-year-old son. He was 9 years her senior, and none of that was necessarily problematic. What she pointed to, which finally ended their relationship, was that he had had a vasectomy and didn't want more children, refused to have the vasectomy reversed. She wanted children, and the marriage collapsed. The straw that broke the camel's back, the worst thing that could have happened to her, was the breakup of this marriage, according to her friends. That was just like her most vulnerable raw nerve, and it was really damaging. In September of 1981, she wrote a new will, and she gave the house that they bought when they got married and the contents of it to Burris, and all of her musical fortune she gave to her brother. And today it would be worth upwards of $29 million. It all came to a head one night. The whole family, the whole extended family, was out to dinner at a fancy restaurant, and she and he had a gigantic blow up at the table in the middle of the restaurant in front of everybody. Big scene. She filed for divorce. In 1982 is when she filed. She filed while she was in Lenox Hill Hospital. She was in Lenox Hill Hospital purportedly for exhaustion, but the reality is she was emaciated and suffering the side effects of this eating disorder. This is where she filed for divorce. She was getting therapy, gave her the courage. So let's talk about this eating disorder. And this is just a warning to anybody who doesn't want to hear, and I'm not going to get into really large details. I think we all know what we're talking about here. We can't talk about the life of Karen Carpenter without including it, because it was significant in her life, symptomatic of issues in her life. It directly caused her death, and it contributed socially after her death. So let's talk about it. She began this weird diet in high school. I remember this diet. I've been on every diet. So the Stillman diet. The Stillman diet was all about the water. You had to drink 8 glasses of water. I thought my kidneys were going to float right out my mouth. Let's forget about it. Miserable diet. But she did manage to get her weight at 120 pounds, where it stayed steady until about 1973. I thought she always looked really petite. It never occurred to me until later, after this date. One day after a concert that they did, somebody had taken still photographs, and she didn't like how she looked in the photographs. And so she hired a trainer, and the trainer was like, okay, well, the best way that you can get fit, because you're not, best way you can get fit is to build muscle, and muscle will elevate your metabolism, and you'll feel better, and you'll look great. And so the trainer had her building muscle, and she felt like she was bulking up, and she didn't like it. So she fired the trainer, and she began this obsessive situation with calories and exercise, to the extent that by September of 75, she weighed 91 pounds. And people hadn't seen her for a while, and they did a concert. And when she came on stage, the entire audience gasped because they thought, well, what's wrong with her? She looked very unwell. She got all these letters from fans. What's wrong with you? Are you okay? Are you sick? She denied. She goes, oh, no, I'm just tired. We've been touring. She was asked in a public interview. This interview, I could not believe this interview. This guy had all the tact of, he had no tact. He says to her in this interview, people think, you have an eating disorder because you've lost so much weight and you look so emaciated. It's basically what he said in live camera. What's going on, and she really was uncomfortable. And she said, oh no, I'm just pooped. I'm just tired from touring. But all of her close family and friends were really worried about her. It was obvious, she was struggling. In 1981, she asked her brother Richard for help. And at the same time, I'm trying to find the chronology here, around the same time, she was told, call Cherry Boone. Now, Pat Boone, if anybody remembers Pat Boone, his daughter, Cherry, they had a family singing group. And his daughter, Cherry, had struggled with the disorder. And it was kind of known because she'd been very public about her path to recovery. And so Karen Carpenter called her up, and they became really good friends. And she's quite a lot in the documentary, too. And she recommended a psychotherapist in New York City. But things started to happen that people didn't really completely understand till after the fact. In 1981, she started taking thyroid medicine under her married name so people wouldn't know who it was for, to increase her metabolism. And she also began to, and being careful of the words I use here, to take laxatives incorrectly. And we all know that's part and parcel of that teeter-totter of eating disorders. I hate to avoid the words. The one that starts with a B. She got down to, this is really horrendous. I think I weighed this much in the first grade. She got down to 77 pounds. And she told the doctor she was dizzy and she had an irregular heartbeat. Not good. In September of 1982, she was back at Lenox Hill Hospital, and they gave her parenteral nutrition. This is when you don't eat. They put in an IV, and they give you intravenous feedings with electrolytes and nutrients. And she gained 30 pounds. But her heart had been damaged by, that situation. But she was able to maintain that 30 pounds. In November of 1982, she went back to California and she began making a new album with her brother Richard. In December of 1982, she did her last public singing performance. This is really sad. Her nieces, was it her nieces and nephews, godchildren? Some close relations were attending the Buckley School, which is, fancy school for little kids in LA. And she joined them for their Christmas concert and sang with the kids. And, it was very sweet. In January of 1983, she was last seen in public at a gathering of former Grammy winners. They were having the 25th anniversary for the Grammy Awards, and all these former winners came. She began writing songs. Her brother had been the one to do all the writing of songs, but she began writing songs. And then February 4th of 1983, and I think this is a significant date for her to have a crisis. She was getting dressed to go to the lawyer to sign her divorce papers. And she collapsed in her closet when she was getting ready, the closet of her parents' Downey home. So she was back living with her family again. And they could not resuscitate her. She was 32. On the 8th, they had her funeral. There were more than 1,000 mourners at the funeral, and it was at Forest Lawn. She was buried at Forest Lawn. In 2003, her remains were moved and buried with her parents in a private mausoleum at Westlake Village. It's another place in LA. So they did her autopsy, and it was revelatory. She died of specifically emetine cardiotoxicity. Emetine is also known as ipecac. And I did not know this, and I think that they need to make this more broadly understood. Ipecac is that little bottle of syrup that you have when you have small children, so that if they ingest something, you can induce vomiting. They drink it, they vomit. You're trying to get whatever it is you don't want them to have inside, you want to get it out. I did not know that ipecac had a cumulative effect. Once you've consumed a bottle of it, the toxic chemicals of it remain in your body. And then the next time you drink it, that builds up. And you can reach a level of toxicity that affects your heart. Her blood sugar was 6 times normal. That can't be good. After she died in 1983, she got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. Paul McCartney called her the best female voice in the world. Elton John said she had one of the greatest voices of our lifetime. John Lennon ran into her someplace, and he went up to her and told her how great her voice was. Her drumming was praised by all the top drummers in the world ever. I mean, they just were completely blown away about how good she was. In 1975, she was named with the top 10 best. And also, she was number 9 in the VH1 Top Women of Rock and Roll. That's interesting. Number 29 out of, I guess, 100. In 2010, Rolling Stone rated her 94th in the greatest singers of all time. I put her higher than that. But here's what happened as the result of this terrible tragedy and terrible loss. Her death was the first real public acknowledgement of the danger of eating disorders, and it brought great attention to it. Her family began the Karen A. Carpenter Memorial Foundation for eating disorder research. In 1994, they created the Richard and Karen Carpenter Performing Arts Center right next door to Cal State Long Beach Music Department, so that they had this beautiful facility in her honor. And just in case you're interested in watching the documentary and listening to her glorious voice, just the poignancy of her voice, it's so beautiful. The video documentary is called Karen Carpenter, Starving for Perfection. It's on Prime. I think I might have paid $1 for it. And it was made in 2023. And it is a really well done documentary. So that's Karen Carpenter. And as always, Deborah Lupien and I are going to get together and pursue this a little more. But that's the very sad, tragic death of the most glorious voice. And makes me sad just to think about it. So thank you. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back. Slán go foil. Slánte.